Morning everyone, welcome to the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee. I'm Florence Eshalomi, I'm the chair of the committee. Could I just ask our guests to introduce themselves please, for the record?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm Jack Newman, Research Fellow at the University of Bristol.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Zoe Billingham, Director of IPPR North in Manchester.
I'm Colin Copus, I'm an Emeritus Professor from the Montfort University in Local Politics.
I'm Joe Fyans, I'm the Head of Research at Localis, the local government think tank.
Fantastic. Can I ask my colleagues to introduce themselves and if they have any declarable interest?
I'm Gary Mahindra, I'm the Conservative Member of Parliament for South West Hertfordshire, former County, District and Parish Councillor.
Louise, Member of Parliament for Broxbourne, and I'm also currently a Hertfordshire.
Lee Dillon, the MP for Newbury, also a West Berkshire Unitary Councillor and a Thatcham Town Councillor.
Will Forster, MP for Woking. I will declare an interest as I'm a Surrey County Councillor with Tim, who's one of our guests later. When debt comes up, I'll declare that I'm also a Woking Borough Councillor as well.
Mayor Ellis, MP for Ribble Valley and also Parish Councillor.
Nishaba Khan, MP for Gillingham and Rainham, and I was a councillor until November last year.
Chris Curtis, Labour MP for Milton Keynes North, never been a councillor.
Joe Powell, Kensington and Bayswater.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to the committee this morning. Obviously, we're looking at a really big agenda. One of the clear missions from the new government around devolution and additional powers. Obviously, we've had the publication of the white paper. So just wanted to start with a general opening question to all of you. In terms of looking at the current powers that strategic authorities have, do you feel that the areas which currently have the strategic authorities have enough in terms of their powers for carrying out that full-scale devolution?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think devolution has tended to be focused very strongly on economic growth over the years, and they have a significant amount of powers in terms of transport and increasingly skills, but there are big gaps in terms of the broader provision of combined authorities. So thinking especially about areas of public health and other areas of social policy where those factors often feed into that broader economic picture over the longer term, and keeping combined authorities narrowly focused in that way often means that excludes large areas of policy that could make a big difference to local prosperity and the local economy. And then finally, I think to say that there's a big question about fiscal powers, and we might get into that later, but I think there's a big gap there in terms of the fiscal powers that combined authorities have.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just to say it's really welcome that the government has brought this bill forward so early in the Parliament and is clearly taking the devolution of power in England very seriously, and that's to be welcomed. I'd argue the current state of devolution in England specifically is a mixture of devolved power where mayors have control over the areas that have been kind of given to them by government, but also there's a lot of delegated power, which more means that actually they're kind of helping government perform some of its functions at the regional level. So I think we're quite a long way from full-scale devolution. My final point just linked to that is in the course of the passage of this bill through Parliament and in the coming months, it'd be really helpful if the government started to set out sort of what its end vision for devolution is in England. I think that would help on many fronts. I think firstly to give confidence to citizens and people that this is kind of a one-way directional shift of power to the regional level and to communities, but also to those local stakeholders, including businesses who want the certainty of the devolution agenda, and as well as looking at kind of Whitehall and Westminster and how it works. I think if there was a clear sort of end vision, let's say, of where they want devolution to get to, that would really help Westminster mobilise behind this new model of governance in England.
Yeah, I mean, I agree absolutely with everything that's been said so far. I've just had, I suppose, a critique, which is that there is a distinction between devolution and decentralisation. The first being the handing down of autonomy, powers and freedoms. The second being the handing down of tasks, functions, some budgets and some responsibilities. And I think what we've seen so far under the last government and under this government is more edging towards decentralisation rather than devolution. There's nothing that's coming to local government in England that replicates the devolution that occurred to Scotland and Wales with the formation of their parliaments and chamber. And I think what is the missing part of this agenda, which would really give these strategic authorities the ability to be able to tackle the tasks that they've got, is a much greater freedom and autonomy from the centre. And I think we will pick this up again when we get to financial devolution.
Just on that, Professor Copus, do you think a single settlement funding model would help distinguish between that devolution and decentralisation? Because essentially those authorities will have greater flexibility.
Yeah, I think it absolutely would, and I think that package is one of the ways in which devolution can start to become real and shift from decentralisation into a much more clearer understanding of what devolution is. I think it has to go beyond that, however. I think there has to be ways in which the strategic authorities, and indeed I would argue all authorities, are able to have greater financial freedom from the centre. And as I say, I know that's going to come up later on, but I think that is the missing part of the jigsaw so far.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's all been pretty well covered. The only thing I'd add is planning, and I think that the current direction of travel from the government to give strategic planning powers, formal strategic planning powers to the mayors is really welcome. I think the issue kind of does exist kind of in between that decentralisation, devolution point, because obviously we now have second consecutive government elected on a mandate with a manifesto that involved hundreds of thousands of houses a year, so there is going to have to be some kind of targeting. And I think having that strategic, broad spatial planning at the combined authority level does help to kind of get those homes delivered in the right places, obviously with the right kind of mechanisms all the way down.
Yeah. Obviously, you'll be aware that there are additional 4 proposed mayoral combined authorities. So you've got North East, South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire and Liverpool City region, and looking at their funding settlements. So in terms of the unitary authorities, do you feel that they should be established before each region transitions into a mayoral combined authority, or should they both sort of happen in tandem with each other?
I mean, I'll comment on that. I think that you have to sort of understand the historical contingency of it all, and that this is a model that started in Greater Manchester amongst unitary authorities, so you can, and then it most significantly rolled out in the West Midlands with unitary authorities. I think that necessarily means we have CAPCA, the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, which does involve district councils. We don't have any others. So I think it's not to say that the model itself explicitly calls for unitary authorities. I think more the capacity problems in local government, the recruitment problems, they probably make a stronger case than just something like than just handling the integrated settlement. I think you could, in a situation where district councils were perhaps much better resourced and have much less kind of historic under-resourcing, would help. But where we are now, I think the unitary authority model has a lot of strong arguments for it from the kind of financial standpoint, more so than just the model itself.
I'm actually going to disagree with that. I think that there is actually no reason in theory or practice why devolution should be predicated on reorganisation at all. There are council systems across Europe and indeed the globe where much smaller authorities in multi-tiered systems are running services that are almost unheard of for local government in this country, where we have a much bigger scale. Devolution doesn't need unitarisation of local government. What it needs is the right powers coming down at the right level. And what a tiered system does is it builds into local government a level of sophistication that enables local government to stay close to the people that it is representing and serving on one level and operate at a higher level on others. We seem to struggle in this country with the whole idea of tiers, or recently we've struggled with it. There are multi-tiered systems, as I say, across the globe, and the OECD produced a report back in 2016 that showed that the majority of structures of local government are multi-tiered, not unitary.
Will, you wanted to come in quickly?
Thank you. I just wanted to come in on this because you've highlighted the Europe issue where we're very out of kilter. So if we have 500,000 population unitary authorities, that's 3 times larger than they are now, but around 250 times larger than French councils. Why do you think government is so reluctant to delegate power and funding to the councils we have now? They have to be mega councils by European standards.
If you want me to be honest, I think it's, and this is the irony in talks about devolution, I think there is a real reluctance to let go completely of local government, and the fewer councils there are and the fewer councillors there are, that's the other part of this agenda, the easier local government is to control from the centre. And when you have a system that's been developed over the years, over decades and beyond, that is about the centre controlling localities, then the fewer there are, the easier it is. You know, why do we need all these pesky councils and all these pesky councillors? They're just getting in the way of the centre being able to control. So I think, again, that's one of the ironies of devolution, that we talk about passing powers down, but at the same time we're reducing the number of councils so that they're easier to control. And I think that, personally, is what's at the bottom of it.
It's about control, not better government.
No, I would argue, yes. Because, again, the evidence suggests that the bigger you make local government, it doesn't always become more efficient, doesn't always become more effective, doesn't always become cheaper. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But as you rightly pointed out, we're already in this country looking at councils with populations way above the European average. And those councils across Europe are still operating and providing services that are at a level we would find acceptable.
May I just come in on that? I think one only point that I would slightly push back on what's just been said is obviously we do have kind of hyper-local governance in England, you know, whether that's town and parish councils or whether that's neighbourhood governance, neighbourhood forums. And I think under a unitarised model, it becomes even more important to focus on that tier and the responsibilities and powers they have at that level, as well as how they then interact with unitary councils. So I perhaps don't have quite as cynical view as Colin, but I do think that there's, you know, a need and an opportunity to help mobilise that lower tier of governance, that hyper-local level in a unitarised model.
I think just on the population, I think when we're looking at the strategic authorities, I think we're working on the assumption of around 1.5 million for that geography. But I think one of the areas that the government are keen to highlight is there won't be any devolution islands. You'll have places that have got natural sort of partners and neighbours. We all know with constituents and residents, they don't know the difference between ward boundaries, but it's right down to those services. Are they being delivered well? So it's a case of, do we need more clarity in terms of who's funding what, who's responsible for what, to make sure we see that efficiency locally? Jack?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think there's an important point here about the alignment of boundaries. So it's really important that we finally settle the boundaries of local government and achieve some sort of stability over the coming decades, because they've been in constant flux for a long time, not just the boundaries but the institutions as well. I think this is reflected in the boundaries that Whitehall use for policy development. So if you look at the boundaries of the integrated care systems, for example, or any other policy geography of any department, they don't align with one another. And some stability in local government boundaries might help that alignment. Once you've got that alignment, you're able to join up services so much better. It's so much easier for these different institutions to work together. And secondly, it means that the public actually have an idea of who's responsible for the services they use, rather than knowing that they're in this area for that service, this area for that service. And the areas all have ridiculous names that don't mean anything to local people.
Yes, so. Like, why would you have Vauxhall Ward and the Vauxhall constituency? Local Government Association not talking to Boundary Commission. Lee?
Yeah, it was on the boundaries. So at the moment, the proposal are for unitaries to join up together, but within their existing unitary boundary, in effect. However, there may be communities, and I've got examples locally, where there are smaller towns and villages right on the edge of a particular unitary, which actually could make more sense coming into its neighbouring unitary if you're going to redraw it. But if you start going through that, it's a whole boundary commission review of local government. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, no, it can get very messy. My view is that it makes more sense to build from the building blocks we have in local government and then think about how policy geographies can align around those. Although there is also a question of where the public's voice is in this, and I think broadly throughout the devolution debate, throughout the drawing of boundaries over many years, the public haven't really had a say in that.
I just add to that quickly as well. I think also there's something about criteria here, and it would be helpful, I think, as we get further down the road at this, for the government to spell out more clearly what they want from a unitary authority. So, like, do we want a town and its hinterlands? Like, what? I think that might help kind of, if it is the case that the books need to be open on some of these things. I think it would help if we knew specifically what we're going for here.
On to Gagan, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We're going to move on to questions about integrated settlements and the pots associated with that and how it ties with local growth plans. Do you think there's enough support already for the mayoral combined authorities to make best use of the integrated settlements funding pot? And if not, what more does government need to do?
May I come in on that? It's an interesting phrasing of the question, because actually I think mayoral combined authorities are set up actually better than many structures in Westminster to deal with integrated spending, and that is, the flexibility to fund between kind of lines of spend. Obviously in Westminster it's very much split between departments. In mayoral combined authorities, the transport lead, the housing lead, they sit together, they're working together all the time. So I actually think mayoral combined authorities structurally are already very well set up to receive integrated settlements. On integrated settlements themselves, I would say actually it's a great progression in the devolution agenda, albeit it won't encompass all of the spending of a mayoral combined authority. So we're still talking about an integrated pot that represents only a fraction of their total spend. But of course, more broadly, as mayoral combined authorities take on more powers and responsibilities, obviously that will need to be matched with staffing and capability in order to do that. But I think that's something that can be kind of easily fixed, whereas actually the structure of mayoral combined authorities, I think, is already well set up to receive integrated settlements.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to say something about the broader question of capacity and the capacity of combined authorities to deliver. I think with the model that's emerged of deal making, where central government offers power and funding in exchange for local places being able to show they have the capacity, there's the assumption that capacity is all the responsibility of the combined authority and central government kind of wash its hands of being involved with that. I think that's a big mistake. I mean, we've got a world-class civil service in this country, and it could be utilised much more effectively in helping build up that capacity at the local level. And just finally, there's a concern here also about the spatial inequality. So places like Greater London and Greater Manchester, they have a history of working together. They also have an economy and civil society that's very able to support the policy-making capacity. If you think about some of these more rural areas, coastal areas, peripheral areas, places without big cities, they often don't have that capacity, the skills, the kind of funding behind different data analysis teams, strategy teams, etc., to be able to deliver on powers. And unless we're just going to say we're going to leave those places alone, central government has a role in building up capacity there, I think.
Just on that, Jack, I digress abuse my position as a London MP as well. You mentioned and referenced London there. London devolution and London Mayor would actually argue that other combined authorities have taken more power and quite more far ahead of them. So you look at West Midlands and Greater Manchester, where there isn't a formal arrangement of decisions between the London Mayor and the London boroughs. Do you think there is a case that London could essentially fall behind in some of the devolution plans being proposed?
Yeah, there potentially is, and I guess this is a concern with London being seen as a static model that was created in 1999 and just has now been left. But I absolutely think it should be part of the forward-going devolution plans. Agree.
We good? Thank you. Moving on to you, Nishaba.
Thank you, Chair. So just moving on to a bit of a look at overview and scrutiny, what challenges do you foresee in ensuring that overview and scrutiny committees have the resources and the authority to hold local decision makers effectively to account in this changing model?
I think overview and scrutiny is one of the Cinderellas of modernisation of local. If you remember that term, modernisation of local government, from quite a number of years ago, when we introduced executives and cabinets, and then there was a sort of realisation what we're going to do with all those councillors that are not part of the cabinet. An overview and scrutiny has always been treated as I say, the Cinderella. It's often under-resourced. It often has a lower level of esteem than the cabinet in the council does. It often doesn't have the direct support from senior officers that cabinets do. But it's an absolutely vital part of the way in which local government does that last bit in its title, and that's govern. Not only does overview and scrutiny have to look internally at the council, it looks externally at a whole range of organisations that, you know, people say that our local government system is confusing because there are two tiers. When you look across the whole spectre of public sector organisations, that's a very fractured landscape. Local government is the simplest to understand, and overview and scrutiny needs to focus on all those myriad of organisations that spend public money, make public policy decisions, affect the lives of communities for decades to come, but do so without a single vote ever being cast. And if anybody is going to hold those to account, it's got to be overview and scrutiny in local government. But it's not resourced in a way that enables it to do that. And so I think the key thing for the success of scrutiny, particularly around combined authorities, there's a big question about how do you hold those to account. Of course, we're sitting in London, as the chair pointed out, which has a different model of combined authority with an elected chamber that's there specifically to hold the executive part to account. We need to resource scrutiny far more than we do. We need to increase its esteem. And we need to give it powers to call witnesses, to be able to say, you will come to talk to these councillors about X, Y, Z. Because unless you do that, you know, we're not coming is an easy way out of what could be potentially publicly embarrassing scrutiny of external organisations.
Yep. Lee, did you want to come in?
Just you spoke about the accountability role of scrutiny, but not the ability of scrutiny commissions to help with policy development and pre-scrutiny work. I just wonder what you think their role could be in pre-development of policy as well as scrutiny of actions.
I mean, that is the other aspect of the scrutiny role. So there is the question of accountability, but there is also the issue of policy development. And I think we put the cart before the horse. Policy seems to sometimes start in the wrong place, where it has to emerge, I would argue, from an evidence base. The way in which you collect that evidence is through overview and scrutiny. And I've got to say, for the councillors that are former councillors and councillors who are on this committee, one of the challenges that scrutiny provides to the politics of local government is the power of the whip and the way in which party groups operate. You all know what I'm talking about. And members have got to be able to critically evaluate policy, despite what the whip's view and the group's view may be on particular issues.
On that subject. Thank you, Chair. On that scrutiny point as well, it's kind of also down what Zoe said earlier about purpose and defining what you want for pre-scrutiny to work. You do need. I think we did a big exercise on governance and scrutiny at Localis last year, talked to all kinds of people, and the main thing that came from it is you need a sense of what is local government for, what are these different tiers supposed to do, and I think without that, it's hard to even get into the pre-scrutiny piece of things.
Again, and then back to Nisha.
Just on Colin's point about whipping, I should declare that I'm the Joint Deputy Chief Whip. But I think my counter to your point, though, is that every politician is a critical friend. How we articulate that is what differentiates us. So I can assure you that councillors all have views, and they may articulate that behind closed doors, and they can hopefully have a united voice thereafter.
Thank you. I think some of the panel have already touched upon this, but just to sort of push it a little bit further and see if any of the other panellists have views as well. What specific measures do you think could enhance the effectiveness of overview and scrutiny, especially as we sort of see the revolving nature of responsibilities within local government?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to build on what I agree with a lot of what's been said about scrutiny accountability. One other important issue we need to bear in mind is that the kind of political culture in this country is set up that we have a party governing and an opposition. We have that in Westminster, we have that in a lot of local authorities. Combined authorities don't work like that. They operate on a consensus model where the idea is to build consensus, and therefore the idea is to remove opposition. And this leaves a gap, and this places even more importance on the scrutiny committee. and currently they're not really working in combined authorities effectively, as others have said. So, yeah, what can we do? I agree that a key point here is to think about their function, what they do. So a lot of that is an expanded role. So they're not just doing the technicalities of going through policy line by line. They also have a research role. They also have a role in developing and thinking about policy. And I think there's a big opportunity here for scrutiny committees in combined authorities to take on a public engagement role and have a role in enhancing local democracy in their area, running consultations, public engagements, thinking about direct democracy, and championing that side of things, which helps give the committee the legitimacy to then hold the mayor to account and create something of a counterbalance. And I think one other option that I know is slightly more controversial, but I'm very fond of the London Assembly model. There are problems with the way the London Assembly works, I'm aware, but the idea that you have a directly elected assembly that is responsible for scrutiny, I think is a really good idea for those combined authorities that are further down the devolution track.
May I come in there? Just to reiterate actually some of what Colin was saying, and I think actually sort of making the overview and scrutiny role a kind of higher status role within the context, the council context, but also the mayoral combined authority context, I think is a good idea to make it an ambitious place to be, a place where, young, new politicians coming through the system can really show themselves. And there's been talk also of whether it should be kind of professionalised locally. So, for instance, the excellent staff that you have of this committee, whether there should be that sort of staffing body to support an overview and scrutiny committee at the mayoral combined level to make it a kind of more professionalised system. I think that would be really excellent. But on the point of, there are lots of other ways as well that mayoral combined authorities can be held to account. And of course, we've seen new ways emerge, whether that's, mayoral question time or mayors going on the radio to speak directly to the public, of course, who they feel is very much their primary sort of place of accountability. So there are lots of different ways, and I think actually some of the proposals brought forward in the white paper, including looking at who is the accountability officer for spending in a mayoral combined authority, and looking at whether we can, either take that or share that with central government. At the moment, it's permanent secretaries and departments who take the full responsibility from an accounting officer perspective, but whether that role should be moved to mayoral combined authorities in time, so that there's actually a kind of sense of locally held at the officer level accountability for the spending of a place too. So I think scrutiny sits within a wider kind of set of things that can be done on accountability locally, but really agree that the sort of more formalisation, professionalisation of oversight and scrutiny, and also bringing in those wider place stakeholders is the right thing to do.
On that metrics point, just quickly, I think it's worth noting that there are loads of different models for metrics, kind of how you measure quality of life, environment, IMDs, MARM indicators, whatever. I think the most important thing for local government is that the metrics picked are consistent, they're as simple as possible, and that they are kind of fairly appraised, as in sort of the targets aren't sort of a constant rolling thing, but long-term strategic targets I think would be appreciated at local government level, regardless of kind of what metrics were chosen.
Just on that, Joe, who should choose what the metrics or the targets should be? Should that be the overview and scrutiny? Should that be central government? Should that be the mayor themselves?
I think, I mean, practically speaking, it should probably be a part of the bill, right? If we're going to say because that's who, if the integrated settlements are sort of being negotiated in that way, how they're appraised should be at central government level. But I think it should be, yes, as long term as possible, and based on not kind of an ideal type, but on what's actually happening on the ground now. I guess versus appraise it versus if it was being done by central government or if nothing was being done at all, rather than against kind of an ideal type.
May I come back on that, Chair? Thank you. I have a slightly different view on that, actually, in that I think the current government has set out its 5 missions, and I actually think there's real scope through the kind of outcomes framework for mayoral combined authorities to propose their own outcome metrics based on local priorities. And actually then we might see and reflect some of the already existing different areas of focus of different mayors, whether it's King McGuinness in the North East who's focused on child poverty, or other areas that may have other objectives. So actually I think within the broad framework of government's own objectives, I think mayoral combined authorities should be proposing their outcomes, of course in agreement with government. It's got to be a two-way agreed thing, but actually I think there should be more scope for places to propose their own outcome measures.
Should I just add briefly to that? I think that's absolutely right. And when you consider we are now moving away from an urban focus on devolution and combined authorities. It's absolutely vital that there is a negotiation between government and the combined authorities and the areas that they cover, that the metrics that are used to measure success and or not are negotiated and that they fit the particular areas and the particular devolution deals. I think an overall standardised approach wouldn't be devolution, to be quite honest with you.
I think just in summary, I suppose what I'd be interested to hear from the panel is, do you think that given the current structures, new structures proposed by the devolution paper, that residents will be able to effectively engage with their local leaders?
I think it will be extremely difficult. I mean, the magic figure of 500,000 population. I now know the source of that. But there has been a constant search for this, what you might call the philosopher's stone of population size. We get this optimum size, then everything will be lovely. You know, it'll be efficient, it'll be effective, it will be cheap. But independent academic research over the decades has shown that there just isn't this magic population size. And in fact, relating this to your question, what we do know is that the bigger local government gets, the sort of democratic criteria of engagement with councils, of trust in councillors and local officials, of community cohesion, of an affinity with this new institution, all of those things that are important in the democratic sense, more consistently decline, this is what research has shown, the bigger local government gets. And those findings are more consistent than the findings that say the bigger local government gets, the more efficient and effective and the cheaper it becomes. It's invariably more difficult with a population of 500,000, if that's what we end up with, for communities to even feel part of that organisation, to even understand where it is or what it is, let alone want to engage with it. And that is, you know, when I come back to my defence of a tiered system, the tiered system provides the mechanisms by which the public can engage with political leaders at a certain point. Now, if you create a combined authority and then you say we're going to parish the whole area, and also you say but we're going to have area committees as well, then you've just reintroduced the system that you've scrapped, only on a different scale.
Mind if I just push back on this point slightly? Because I mean, Will said something quite interesting at the start, which is district councils are bigger than a lot of European comparisons, and obviously what we're trying to create is even bigger than that. But isn't that sort of basically the point? The problem isn't about this kind of localism versus larger argument. The problem is, arguably, I think many of us would believe that district councils are the wrong size. They're too big to actually fully represent communities, and they're too small to get some of those efficiencies that you'd argue for. So is it not a case that rather than just pushing powers up, we need to, if we're getting rid of that district council level, push a lot of those powers down to parishes? Maybe the government hasn't been talking enough about that, whilst also moving other powers up.
Well, I think, again, if you look at the international level, some of our districts are big by comparison with municipalities that exist elsewhere. We already have, within our two tiers, the largest units of local government across Europe. So that idea that districts are too small or too big, I think, is really an argument that's looking at the question of size, when we ought to be looking at the question of resources, powers, autonomies, the sorts of things that local government does, and indeed the question that Joe raised about what do we want local government to do. We often focus on size as a way of avoiding some of those more difficult issues. But I would argue that given the size of counties, our districts are about right.
Just mindful of time,
sorry.
And then Louise, quickly.
Quick one. So it's interesting that we've sort of gone from size to resources, and I just wanted to ask thoughts on, is there another angle on this, which is that some places, doesn't matter how big or how small, some places are great at engagement and consultation and some places aren't. And I just wanted thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in there. I mean, firstly, to say, of course, when you speak to members of the public, as the chair started off this conversation, you know, it's rare that a member of the public, and quite rightly and understandably, will know at what level decisions and powers are held and made, and all they want is for the change they want to see happen. So I think we've got to lead with a kind of argument about effectiveness, because that's what the public demand. I do think you're right that sort of public engagement at the local authority level is patchy, and that should be absolutely essential part now of, if unitarisation is to go ahead as the government intends, for that to be absolutely clear about what is expected of unitary authorities in terms of engagement, and as I said previously, how they then communicate and link up and work together with the hyperlocal level, the parishes, the town councils, because that has to still happen. Otherwise it will have failed. So I think that's an absolutely essential part of this.
Louise, really quick.
Yeah, all I wanted to say is push back slightly. I think districts are the best size of local government, because I think they allow people to connect with the communities more. So it was just the contrary argument to what Chris was putting over.
Yeah, I think what we retain from the district structure unitarisation is really important to that regard. So.
Thank you very much for that. I think I should just speak as somebody who came from a unitary authority that's only 20 years old and represented 280,000 people and went through that change, that you can still have connections to your local community.
Moving on swiftly to the money.
280,000, not 500,000.
Yeah. Moving on swiftly to the money. Fiscal devolution, Joe.
So on, I think most of you mentioned fiscal powers in your introductions. Obviously, the white paper outside of integrated settlements doesn't devolve any additional fiscal powers. I'm just curious what you think what would you have liked to see? What do you think would be the most appropriate fiscal powers to be devolved? We can start with.
Yeah, thank you. I think that fiscal devolution is an essential part of the devolution discussion and what needs to come next. And I think, frankly, many of us, including the wider stakeholders, but including local leadership, were quite surprised not to see anything in the bill on that. The one exception is the mayoral levy that was proposed in the white paper, which, like London, then becomes a kind of community levy that you can attach to developments. One of the lowest hanging fruit in this space is the visitor levy. Edinburgh has just announced that they're going to be introducing it. The Scottish Parliament has given local councils in Scotland the power to bring that forward if they so wish. It also happens in other European cities like Barcelona, and that's an absolutely low-hanging fruit, because that doesn't actually take any tax-raising powers away from central government. It's instead creating a new form of fundraising at the regional level. So I would say that at an absolute minimum, but with a demonstration that actually, if mayors are able to raise their own finance, that then they can demonstrate how they can spend it locally according to their objectives, according to the outcomes framework that they'll agree with government to improve outcomes in their places. And just to give a sense of scale, even though the visitor levy doesn't have to be a big percentage on every night stayed in a city, in Edinburgh that's £50 million. Now, most combined authorities, in terms of their investment funds, are about £20 million a year. So it's actually quite a sizable amount of money vis-a-vis the amount of money that mayoral combined authorities currently have that's flexibly used to them. So I'd really support that as a first step, but in order to mature the model of devolution and to really give the mayors the power and the accountability that they seek actually and take in at the same time, we really need to see other moves forward in fiscal devolution, whether that's percentages of income tax or other of the major tax bands in future. But that needs to come hand in hand with accountability too.
Thank you. Zoe's just nicked my favourite example, which is a real problem. I mean, I don't think there's anybody sitting around this table that would have checked out of a hotel somewhere abroad, paid their hotel bill, and then paid their municipal tax bill.
Why do you think the Treasury or central government haven't?
I'm going to have to rely on my cynicism that Zoe pointed out earlier, and I have to say I'm not cynical by nature, I'm just cynical by experience. And I think it is because the centre doesn't want to let go of tax-raising powers. We're almost unique across the globe in that our local authorities, I know we're talking about combined authorities, but our local authorities have two major taxes available to them. In Belgium, for example, the municipalities have something like 80 taxes that they can raise. 80 that they can raise. They don't use them all. and they set their own levels, and you may go to some municipality in Belgium where the tourist tax is lower than the next one, but that's local choice. That's about those sorts of choices people make locally. So I think in answer to the question, I think there's a real fear of allowing units below the centre to have really fundamental tax raising powers, and of course coupled to that are the spending powers that go with the ability to raise that. And if devolution is ever to be genuinely successful, we need to be looking abroad. We need to be looking at some of those models of other things by which local authorities can raise revenue. Otherwise, they're always going to be cap in hand to the centre, and that again is counter to what the spirit of devolution would be.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to raise one concern with fiscal devolution, which is spatial inequality, and that places that are able to raise the most money are often the places that least need the money to spend on services. And I think this isn't a reason for not doing fiscal devolution. It's for thinking about fiscal devolution carefully and in a strategic way that it includes thought about the spatial distribution of resources in this country, and therefore it's useful to distinguish between a complete freedom of authorities to be able to raise whatever taxes they want, cut whatever taxes they want, and the idea that you have certain taxes where the revenue goes only to the local level, even if it is then redistributed. I think the latter allows you to protect the funding of local government without necessarily going down the route of driving further spatial inequality in what is already a very spatially unequal country by OECD standards.
I don't disagree with that, by the way. I think that's right. And I think that the more councils are able to raise for themselves, the more resources that frees up centrally for the sorts of equality issues that Jack's talking about.
So if you look at where we are on the kind of international standard, obviously I think we all know, it's 5 or 6% of tax take, and it's, is there any... Do you think there should be a target for changing that? Could there be a metric for increasing that? Or?
I think that would be difficult to do given the existing structure and given sort of lack of clarity about where we want to move to. I think once we decide what we do want to devolve, or what will be devolved in terms of fiscal freedoms, that's the point at which you can start to decide, well, what are the metrics and how. I mean, there are a number of models across the globe where there's a shared tax take. So, for example, vehicle excise tax, will be collected centrally, but part of that is exported to municipalities. So we don't necessarily have to have one body collecting the tax that just goes to itself. You can have a system where those tax takes are shared.
May I just make one further point, Chair? Just sorry, it's an interesting sort of idea of a sort of tipping point about at what stage are regional leaders then held to account for the money they raise locally, because at the moment my sense of why one of the reluctances of government to allow for fiscal devolution, even a visitors levy, was that they've made a strong pitch about not increasing taxes, but of course if they gave the freedom to mayors to increase taxes, it should be politically on the mayors then to decide whether politically they want to raise those taxes and then take responsibility for that spend and that tax in that area. And until they see the difference that's then on the mayor politically, and we kind of reach that tipping point of responsibility, I think there will be a reluctance, because they will feel that any tax raising decisions will be kind of dotted line back to the government as opposed to the responsibility of regional leadership.
Moving on swiftly to unitarisation.
Thank you. I want to talk about unitarisation, particularly risks around it. So I recently asked Angela Rayner a question around what are the risks for vulnerable people when local government is reorganising? How does the competing priorities of trying to meet the 1.5 million homes fit together? I'd welcome your thoughts on this. So what is the risk in your mind of reorganisation and unitarisation, and then what can government and then what can councils as well do to mitigate that?
I mean, I don't have strong views on unitarisation one way or the other, to be honest. So I think I'll probably pass this to other.
I mean, I think there's something about care markets and the provision of social care and making sure that service is uninterrupted if you're fragmenting county councils that currently do it. I'm not an expert in social care provision, but I think that's something that obviously needs to be very carefully looked at as you do the transitionary process. The point about housing and local plans, I think, is very well made, and I think that's how you continue to develop local plans sort of on a burning platform. That could be a problem. I think at some point there may have to be a kind of prioritisation made explicit by government in terms of what are we focusing on here? Are we focusing on our reorganisation? Are we focusing on our planning, etc.? Because there's not a lot of capacity to go around at that district level. So I think that is a concern for sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think the estimates of the sort of cost saving of unitarisation sort of include the actual raw cost of doing the unitarisation itself. It's big organisational change, and I think that carries both financial risk and operational risk to the services provided. I mean, as I say, the cost of doing the unitarisation, I hope, means that government will help support local authorities through the transition, and that will be absolutely essential to make sure that no essential services are dropped inadvertently during the process.
I think there is a real risk to certain services. I mean, it's always a question of timing with these sorts of things, and I think, as Mr. Foster pointed out, we've now got a government that has given some house building targets, for example, targets in other areas of responsibility for local government. To expect local government to go through what will be a major upheaval, not quite on the scale of 1972, but not far off of it, at the same time as meeting all of these additional pressures that are on them, is asking an awful lot of our local government. And I must admit, I do pick up on Zoe's point. I think sometimes the cost element of reorganisation is often woefully underestimated. There is a cost to reorganising. It's not a cost-free process. I mean, I've seen estimates of £20 million costs associated with reorganisation in each and every county area. That could then roll out over a number of years. Often missed from some of these discussions is the issue about diseconomies of scale. We hear an awful lot about the economies of scale, less about the diseconomies of scale. And I think we're already at a stage with some of our existing unitaries where the costs are not quite the savings that were going to be promised. In fact, I mean, I'll just throw this in out of, I think, 4 new unitaries that were created since the report that the government seems to be using as the basis for this 500,000 population. 4 of them are on the exceptional financial support list, one receiving something like 80 million, while the estimated savings from unitarisation was 20 million. Now, if bigger is always better, why are they on that list?
If I could, we were going to move on to finances and debts. That worked really well. I think the report that you're talking about is the PwC report from 2020. That stated that savings over 2.9 billion could be made through unitarisation over 5 years. I'm tempted to ask, do you agree? It sounds like you don't. I actually think you make a really good point about the costs of change. Yeah. That's a concern. And then I would highlight my area has been in 114 for some time, is a 2-tier area. So I don't think you can say it's as simple as that. Is it the councils that were chosen to go unitary had financial problems in the first place, or trying to compare everything, are unitaries not making the savings they should?
I think I suppose the answer to that question is it depends on who you ask. And if you ask the councils themselves and you ask a commissioned management consultancy, they will say, yes, we are. I'm always sceptical, and I think you have to look a lot more closely at the sorts of costs that are being calculated and how they're being calculated. I think in that particular report, for example, one of the examples about the economies of scales that was used was COVID. I would argue very much that COVID indicated the savings that district councils can bring to those sort of emergency procedures, whereas districts were far closer to the people, the vulnerable people that were requiring services. They knew their areas, they knew how to deliver and target services in a way that the larger an authority becomes, the more difficult that is. I think I'd point out as well on the one of the councils that are on this list that I mentioned has a population over the magic figure of 500,000. So if it's always population that saves money, I simply think that it's not. Also, there is, that particular report, and I'm not decrying the work that was done in it, or in any way PwC, and they're a well-respected, renowned organisation that do some good work for local government. But I think there's a time frame involved as well. From 2020, we're now hitting a period where costs are increasing anyway in an awful lot of services, social care, SEND, those sorts of areas. So I think the figures that were included in that particular report are not likely to be the ones for all sorts of reasons that couldn't have been predicted at the time that that report was written.
Hi, do you want to come in quickly?
Yeah, just a final specific question on debts and reserves of existing councils and how you think they should be treated when combining councils. So the Minister for Local Government has been pushing this a few times and hasn't given a clear answer on this. And I know where I'm in Lancashire, it's one of those things that actually, if it is factored in, could impact quite a lot on how people want sort of different councils to come together. So just if anyone has any thoughts on what you would expect, how you would expect debts and reserves from existing councils to be treated if they come together.
Nothing specifically. Only to say that I don't think there's much, in certain parts of the country the debt is so high that I don't think there's much precedent for what happens if you put two public bodies together with this amount. So I think it is kind of uncharted waters. I don't have a sort of hard and fast answer to that question, but what you do with debts of the type some local authorities have, I mean, we're going to need to know before we start getting too far down the road, I would assume.
I'll just say, sorry, Larry.
Yeah,
something very briefly about debts, and one way not to respond to it is for central government to go in and demand that the local authority cuts back on all its services, which seems to be a common response to local authorities going into debts, which has obviously knock-on consequences further down the line. So I think that's just one thing to avoid. Appreciate it's not a direct answer to the question.
And again, a kind of supplementary point to your question, which is that, of course, the government's planning to take a review of local government finance and recalibrating based on need. So it hopefully might address in the sort of more medium term, those authorities that have fewer reserves or greater levels of debt, in the sense of, there's been a big lag between need and funding from central government for a long time. So hopefully that will bring it back into balance. But what you do in the interim period, I think, is still an open question.
Thank you so much. I think it's given us a lot of food for thought on this area of stuff we'll develop over the coming weeks on this really important area. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is it? That's tax take.
Yeah, I mean, well, this isn't everything everyone in the world just take it right.
Yeah.
The question is, do you basically keep this up and then let the Treasury decide?
Yeah, exactly. Or you do like a tourism levy, which means
Discussing running commentary.
Wait for our guests to settle. We are live. Welcome to the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee. I'm Florence Eshalomi. I'm the chair of the committee. Could we just get our guests to introduce themselves for the record, please?
Thank you very much. My name is Councillor Bridget Smith. I'm the leader of South Cambridgeshire District Council. I'm a full member of the Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority, and I'm Vice Chair of the District Council Network. Thank you.
Good morning, Councillor Louise Gittins. I'm leader of Cheshire West and Chester Council, but I'm here in the capacity of the Chair of the Local Government Association.
Good morning, Tracy Brabin, the Mayor of West Yorkshire, and I also chair the UK Mayors.
Good morning, I'm Tim Oliver. I'm the Chair of the County Councils Network and the leader of Surrey County Council.
I'll just get committee members to introduce themselves quickly, please.
Louise Cocking, member of Bristol.
Leader and the Member of Parliament for Newbury, also a unitary councillor and town councillor.
Yeah, Hertfordshire County Councillor as well. Sorry.
Will Forster, Woking, already done with declarations of interest.
Mayor Ellis, Ribble Valley in Lancashire.
Michelle Khan, Gillingham and Rainham.
Chris Curtis, Milton Keynes North.
Joe Powell, Kensington and Bayswater.
Thank you for coming before the committee this morning. We're looking at the areas and discussions around English devolution, and obviously on the back of the white paper, we've got a range of questions from committee members. I'll start off with my...
I'm just going to ask an opener that we asked the previous panel, so open to anyone. Do you believe that strategic authorities have currently been provided enough powers from the government to achieve full-scale devolution?
May I jump in? Thank you so much, Chair. Well, mayors are the key to growth, and up and down the country, whether that's West of England, London, West Midlands, West Yorkshire, Manchester, up to the North East, we are innovating and delivering for our communities, and it does feel like this government does understand that, and devolution, by default, is a game changer. And I think, and I know this committee is well aware that this is a once-in-a-generational moment to deliver better outcomes for people across the country and to take power from the centre and give it to the people who, as this government often mention, with skin in the game. And I am really pleased with the way that we've been collaborating with government and the way that civil servants have worked with mayoral combined authorities. But this is very much the beginning. And when the white paper was launched, the Secretary of State was saying that this is the floor, not the ceiling of our ambition. So there will be new mayoral combined authorities coming in, as well as obviously those really well established combined authorities. Now, can we go further? Yes, of course, we can always go further. So, for example, innovation, there is an innovation fund that West Midlands and Greater Manchester and Glasgow have. It would be great if that was rolled out across MCAs. The single settlement is good news to have those pillars of funding, that we no longer have to be in sort of the begging bowl culture, the beauty contest, bidding wars, but we could have greater flexibility and freedoms with those pillars. We've been talking with the Chancellor on fiscal devolution, for example, a visitor levy. I think that's something that's really of interest because it gives us an opportunity to be more self-sufficient. And also another example would be more leadership when it comes to post-16, because currently mayors have responsibility post-19. So there's a gap and young people fall through the net, and we think we can get better outcomes, get more young people into great jobs, technical education from 16. So they're just a couple of examples, but I think this is a really, really exciting time, not just for politics, but for the country and the people across the country, because you cannot grow the economy unless you grow the economy in the regions, and mayors are the key to that.
Louise.
Yes, thank you very much. And without repeating much of what Tracy has said, I'd just like to raise a few points for you to consider in your deliberations. I think whilst it's something in local government we've been asking for a long time, that devolution, so that decisions can be made at a local area, I think there's further clarity that is required. So, for example, Tracy mentioned about our combined authorities who've got many, many years of working together and almost like a pick and mix of powers. We now have strategic authorities with a very clear list of what those powers are going to be. So I think we need a clear approach. First of all, what is a combined authority? What is a strategic authority? What is the difference between those? And how are those powers going to sit between the two areas? So I think it needs further clarity. We're very clear this, with any devolution, needs to be funded so that people can deliver at pace, and that's very clear, the messages that are coming from the areas who have got devolved powers. I think, though, if you look at the powers that are coming down, there's also powers that are going up from local authorities, so we need more clarity around that. There's things around planning, local skills and some other areas. So what does that actually mean, and how can local authorities contribute towards development of those policies that relate to those bearing in mind the experience that they've had over the years. And I think we do need to have more clarity on any future powers that may go from local government up to strategic authority level. I think whilst all this is happening, we need to make sure that we're keeping our eyes on not derailing the missions that the government is trying to deliver. For example, the 1.5 billion houses. Local authorities up and down the country are delivering on those at the moment. So we need to make sure that while we're sorting out devolution, and I'm sure we'll talk about LGR later, that those missions and that delivery isn't derailed because we're looking for our devolution packages. So yeah, I think the answer to the question is right, not yes and not no, and I think there's still a lot of work to do, and we're ready to work with government, and we already are in terms of what that looks like.
Bridget and then Tim.
Thank you very much indeed. So, key to this is fiscal devolution, including localisation of council tax. And, Colin spoke very, brilliantly earlier on, what is devolution and what is decentralisation. And I'm sure you'll give a lot of thought to that, because actually what we're seeing isn't really devolution. And, the very idea that powers are going up is deeply concerning to myself and most of my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I agree with much of what's been said. I mean, I believe that this white paper really does support the government's drive for economic growth, which we know is absolutely essential for this country. And we also know that a strong local economy, drives healthier living. And indeed, in this proposed structure, with mayors having that sort of oversight of strategic growth, with strong unitary councils delivering the day-to-day services, I think that's with the right-sized unitaries and properly financed, I think that gives us the best opportunity of supporting that agenda. I mean, it is absolutely essential that the government moves on with this at pace. Not least of all for certainty for staff, but certainty for residents. And I also think that we must remember throughout that we are here to deliver the best services we possibly can for our residents at the lowest possible cost. But also, it isn't just about local government. This is a one opportunity to look at that sort of coterminosity of other agency services, particularly around health, around community safety, fire rescue and so on, because it is to deliver those healthier outcomes for our residents, the wider determinants of health. It isn't just about local government, and we need to remember this conversation shouldn't just be about us.
Just a quick follow-up for Louise, really. Obviously, London had its 1999 Act. One of, I think, the concerns some of us have is that London actually risks being left behind because of the trailblazer deals are overtaking it in the sense, and we have this situation with the boroughs and the mayor. Do you think that is a risk, that London is now left behind in terms of other deals that are happening? Yeah,
but we do welcome the proposal to actually review the Greater London Authority Act. I know, talking to the London councils, they are concerned that could happen, but I think they're confident that the government will look at this and review it. And I think that will make a much better settlement going forward, so that Greater London looks more like the rest of the country.
Need the powers Tracy has.
If I may, Chair, just to add to that everybody in the country wants a really growing, healthy London. It's our global front door, isn't it? But there are incredible opportunities for the mayors to work together collectively. And one area that we're discussing is procurement of EV buses. So there are buses made in Yorkshire that are on the streets of London, but we are all looking at bringing buses back into public control. We are phasing, we're in different parts of that process. And just think what we could do for UK manufacturing if collectively we all came together and had that order book full of buses for London and elsewhere. But we need London to thrive. But we also want the rest of the country to have those same opportunities that Londoners have.
Just moving on to integrated settlements and growth plans, Nashaba.
Thank you, Chair. And Tracy, I think this is a question for you again. Do you think that the integrated settlements go far enough in consolidating funding?
Thank you for that question. I was delighted that we were named as one of the mayoral combined authorities to get the integrated settlement. It's something I've been fighting for since I became the mayor, because, as you will remember, we've been in these bidding wars. My success is someone else's failure and vice versa. Bidding for EV bus, EV charging points. I mean, it seems absurd to be in that beauty contest. So to have a single settlement is great. Now, the challenge for us is that they're still in pillars. So transport can't be used for housing and or skills and so on. What we're saying is, if you do really want devolution, give us that opportunity to team and ladle where necessary. So if a project is ready to go, a housing project, can we use a little bit of the funding that is still waiting for a green light elsewhere in order to get spades in the ground on that project? And particularly one of the big challenges was in adult education, that we had 5 different funding streams, 5 different departments, different deadlines, different timetables. You know, what we want is to get rid of that, but also to have the autonomy to be able to offer for post-16 a line of sight to technical education and to opportunities, to be very responsive in an agile way to our business need, because somebody in Whitehall or Westminster wouldn't necessarily know what we need. For example, we are committed to spades in the ground on mass transit, our tram network, by 2028. So we know we're going to need a pipeline of engineers and specialists, so we can start that programme of learning now. The same is true of retrofit, that we know we've got this huge programme, we need to train up local workforce, so we need that autonomy. I would say that amongst mayors that are in newer mayoral combined authorities, the threshold of 18 months is a challenge. They believe that that's arbitrary, and we're talking to government, and government are open to the conversation about what thresholds do you have to go through, not necessarily the 18 months necessarily, but what thresholds does government need for reassurance that you are ready for that single settlement. But of course it takes time to plan, so it's always good for mayors to understand what the future looks like.
Thank you. And actually I think you've probably touched upon some of my other questions, but and just in terms of that additional flexibility, just to be really clear, what is it that you think you would and like to see other combined authorities like over that funding? What additional flexibility do you think would be really usul? I think you already mentioned a couple there. But
yeah, thank you. Well, for example, arm's length bodies. So whether that's AHRC, whether that's the Arts Council, whether that's Innovate UK, we as mayors are, we are the rocket fuel of innovation. We will not grow our economies unless we innovate. So we feel that Homes England is another example. I know that we are going to be working very closely with them, but is that the answer? Is a close partnership the answer, or is it actually about devolving the monies to the mayors in order to work with their local authorities to deliver on housing? So we are in really good conversations with government about how we make the white paper and the bill fit for whichever phase you're at as a mayoral combined authority, because the appetite for devolution is great from the Secretary of State, and I know that the whole country eventually will have a mayor, or be on their journey. And I think 90% of the North has a mayor. Everybody's at a different phase, but I think we have to have our eye on the future as well, not just on the present.
And just a final question for me. In terms of receiving that flexible single pot of money in 2026, what impact does that have on your combined authority?
It's huge. And it's a big step, remembering that back in the day we were just a transport authority that dealt with buses. And now we have an ambitious programme of, like I say, mass transit. We're bringing buses into public control. We're building thousands of affordable homes. We have a massive skills for all plan. And we have a mission-led approach which is in parallel to government. So we are ready, we are mature. We have been a combined authority for many years before a mayoral combined authority. So, and we have really strong relationships with local authority leaders. So we're ready for it. But yeah, it's going to be a big change. But that's what we need. Change is surely what this country needs, because we can't sit in the doldrums doing what we've always done.
If I could just make one point. So as somebody who's part of a combined authority, which is an improving combined authority, and its success, I think, is built on the fact that all the councils are full constituent members. And I think that's absolutely imperative, and I believe it's the Manchester model, with those councils being, round about 250,000 population each. And, that's the way of linking the combined authority, the mayoral strategic authorities, down to the communities, to make sure that they are actually, there's two-way communication, and they are actually touching the lives of the people that they're representing.
Louise.
Yeah, just to really build on that, I think that we still need greater clarity on that interaction between local government and the new strategic authorities and what role they play. And actually the Greater Manchester model and the work that Tracy's doing in West Yorkshire, particularly in Greater Manchester, where council leaders have got an area of responsibility. So, for example, Councillor Bev Craig, who's leader on Manchester, leads on growth for the whole of the combined authority, working with those council leaders. We are placemakers at a local level, and I think we just need to work through that in all the new areas that are coming on board. The different strategic or the different combined authorities are all set up in a slightly different way, so we need to learn from good practice and enable the new areas to see that good practice and move forward in a similar situation.
I think the IFS pointed out that obviously all the local authorities are still facing that uncertainty, and where we haven't had that funding simplification of the single status where, so it's good that I think we need to push the government more on that.
Yeah, should I just say a few things about the financial?
We're going to come on to finances.
If I may just jump in about the structure of the MCAs, that in West Yorkshire, all of the leaders they chair a committee. So, for example, Susan Hinchcliffe, the leader of Bradford City Council, chairs the Transport Committee. But also on our CA, we have opposition members as well. So we are open to check and challenge, and we have that transparency. Papers it's all online and recorded live, so people can also see, what's going on in their combined authority.
Just very shortly, I agree with Louise and others. The key to this is to have the absolute clarity on where these different powers sit. And I think in your previous session, you talked a little bit about double devolution and so on, which I'm sure we'll come on to. I mean, I just push back slightly on what Bridget said around district councils being closer to residents. At the end of the day, the upper tier authority are the ones that are delivering social care, children's and adult social care, and we are in and out of people's homes on a daily basis, and indeed they're in and out of our libraries on a daily basis. So I don't think that one councillor is can claim to be closer or further away than the other. At the end of the day, it is from the residents' perspective, who do they turn to if a service is not being delivered, and that sort of public accountability and responsibility is what this bill, I think, is trying to get at. That you've got a mayor that you go to when you're talking about strategic growth, and you might go to it and so on. So it is absolutely setting out a sort of an accountability framework so people can see.
And we're coming on to those very questions.
Moving on from
neatly,
that, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges we face at the moment in our political landscape is that the everyday person on the street doesn't feel engaged or doesn't know how to engage with our political systems. We had a debate in the previous panel around, you know, what is the most effective way to do that, and does it depend on the size of the tier of government? Does it depend on how many resources they have, or is it just a case of some are good at it and some aren't? So I just wonder what you think, what the most effective way is of engaging local communities and stakeholders in all of this process.
Bridget, we'll start with this.
So, I mean, one of the things that really concerns me here is that the local government reform was not in the manifesto of the government. And so, you know, there's already, you know, there actually isn't a national mandate to be going through with this. Cancelling elections actually, you know, furthers that, because, you know, people are then not able to vote when this is a key thing that is the thing that we're all dealing with, to the exclusion of all else at the moment. And I gather there are currently no intentions to hold referenda on whether you know, we all unitrise and what those unitary boundaries will be going to be. So again, there's then no public mandate either there. And every referendum there's ever been on local government reorganisation has fallen. It's shown that actually people like the local government they've got, and they particularly like and trust districts. Now, I know the ship has sailed on this, and we're getting LGR, but you know what we've got to make sure is that, you know, we don't lose what is best about what we currently have in local government. So there is a hypocrisy at the moment that it is, you know, the London boroughs and the metropolitans, you know, Manchester in particular, that are being held up as the exemplar, all of which have populations of 250, 300. And so by insisting that all the rest of us who currently aren't unitarised, mainly rural areas, create these mega councils of 500, actually, you know, singles us out and doesn't treat us equally to those unitaries which are being held up by the exemplars. And the huge risk here is that, you know, you lose what is best in local government, lose the local in it. People like me have to become professional politicians. So I live in a village of 5,000 people. Everybody knows me. They all know where to come to help, and they come to me for help, whether it's a district matter, a county matter, a health matter, or whatever. And part of my job, I accept, is passporting my residents where they need to go. And actually, you know, me doing that for them quite often sort of bumps them up the ladder so that they get the attention that they want, because I know their local circumstances. If we could just look very briefly at all the terrible riots we had recently, it was the local knowledge by local leaders, be it leaders or councillors, of their communities, and the fact that their communities knew them, that actually took the heat out of an awful lot of situations that were very, very overheated. And by increasing dramatically the number of people that we all represent, and I think, you know, we're probably talking about 4,000 odd. I mean, I could potentially be responsible for 14, 16 villages. You know, I won't know them, and they won't know me, and I won't be going to their parish councils, and they won't like it when I don't. Thank you.
Louise.
Yeah, I just want, you can obviously see this is generated a lot of discussion in local government, and what I'm really clear about is that government need to provide clarity on some of the issues that local government is raising. I think going back to the question about who is best able to represent, I'm a unitary authority, Tim is a county council, and Bridget is a district council. We all came into this for the right reasons. We didn't come into this to be professional politicians or not to collaborate with our communities. So actually it's the ward councillors that are the most important. And I think there's a lot of concern and worry about what that future of local government might look like. And so my request to you is for the government to provide clarity on things like 500,000, where has that arbitrary figure come from? But all of us have come into local government for the right reason, and we're in a situation where people are trying to play each other off against each other to say that they're a better councillor, and actually we're all in it to do the very best for our communities. So the answer is, to your question, I think, a ward councillor.
I've just got a few people. Will, quickly, and then...
Thank you. So it follows on from this. The manner in which local government reorganisation happens is really important. For those of you that have been on this journey, how do you think residents and key partners felt as you went on that journey? What are the ways that we should recommend improving that going forward? And I suppose for Tim, as Surrey's about to go on that journey, Surrey County Council tried to become a unitary authority, a single unitary authority in 2020, and obviously you bid to be in the first wave this time. I think it's fair to say you've not taken people with you. How do you think reorganisation can happen when organisations are at odds with each other?
Should I come in first?
Let me come to Tim and then...
All right, okay.
I think your last point actually, Will, that we have taken the district and borough leaders along with us on this journey, and there's some very constructive conversations around what a unitary or unitaries in Surrey would look like. I think I would make the point, to be fair to the government, that it was in the government's agenda, a manifesto to pursue devolution, further devolution. And the point of the local government reorganisation is simply to enable that mayoral devolution. So, I think there's nothing inconsistent in the white paper, I think, with what the government had promised that they were going to do. We have to look at this in terms of strategic services, and those are best delivered at scale. The county council, Surrey has 1.2 million. Many county councils are even bigger than that, and they deliver those strategic services. It is absolutely right that there is then that localism and that engagement. And that can be done from a local government perspective through towns and parish councils, through community forums, or indeed residents' associations. Many of us have very strong residents' associations in our area. I represent about 12,000 people, and I feel that I'm fully engaged with those. Many of the councillors in Surrey, where the areas are parished, do have 14 parish councils, and they engage with those perfectly well. We've got some really good examples of unitary authorities, including Cornwall, Buckinghamshire, Durham, Wiltshire, all over 500,000 that are. If you start to disaggregate, the difference is from a district council's perspective, we're looking in reorganisation terms at sort of consolidating existing services, so consolidating planning departments, leisure departments and so on. In the case of county councils, it's disaggregating social care services and so on. That has to be done really carefully, because if you split this down to two smaller segments, you're going to find that you've potentially got the demand in one unitary and you're raising the council tax in another unitary. So you've actually got to sort of look at how you split this in a sense. 500,000, it might be an arbitrary number, but it is on all of the evidence, and I disagree with what Professor Copus said, all of the evidence suggests that actually you do then start to see efficiency in terms of both financial efficiencies and in terms of economies of scale.
Louise, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just I think to answer your question, residents want to know who's going to empty the bins, who's going to be providing adult social care, who's there if they've got an issue. So they don't really get het up about structures and layers. They want, to have happy, healthy lives. So I think some of the lessons are really strong around communication and people working together. And that's something that we're trying to do within the Local Government Association, is to learn lessons from the most recent examples of unitarisation in North Yorkshire and Cumbria, and work with areas to enable them to go through the process in as simple and as painless method as they can do. But it is really challenging, I have to say, and people are clearly very upset about all of this. But I think by being focused on what it is that we're trying to achieve ultimately, I'm sure we'll all get through.
I've noticed quite a few members. Chris, that's I know that Tracy wants to go.
Lots of people bring up the size and the 500,000. I come from a position of broadly agreeing with Tim's point. as far as I'm aware, on the 1.5 million for the combined authorities, that's not necessarily a statutory test like some other things are. So, there will be flexibility around that. I can't find it in my notes, but I assume that's the same for the 500,000. So if you can come up with a compelling case for why it should be smaller or bigger, you can and will, and I'm sure that will happen across the country. So is there any more clarity you're looking for government across that? Or are you fairly confident in as it's currently set out in the white paper, if there's a good argument for having a smaller 250,000, 300,000 local authority, people will be able to do that?
So that's what we're calling for, that clarity. And I've been saying to people, look, if you've got a compelling argument, you need to do it. And our view is it's up to local places to determine the right size, the right fit for their place, because they actually know that. Local government knows their areas better than that. So I think an ask would be complete clarity on that 500,000 and the flexibilities within that.
Bridget.
Thank you very much indeed. So if I can just pick up on a point of Tim's. Actually, there isn't an evidence base for the 500,000. Colin said he knew where the number had come from. It would have been quite nice if he'd shared that, actually. And on strategic services, yes, it is often the case that they are cheaper if delivered at scale. And that's why so many of us have shared services. So I have a shared waste service and I have a shared planning service, which is an award-winning planning service, which Ministers Pennycook and Vallance have been spending a lot of time engaging with because of their ambitions for Oxford and the Oxford-Cambridge arc and supercharging the growth that we'll have. Now, I've been working on a local plan jointly with Cambridge City for 6 years now, and it's cost millions to get it thus far. And the government wants us to add an extra 150,000 houses to it, and that's fine. And we're having very productive, constructive conversations with them. If I unitarise with Cambridge City, our numbers would be somewhere over 300,000. If I'm forced to include another council to get me up to 500,000, I will have to throw that local plan in the bin and start all over again. And that will have serious impacts on this government's aspirations for growth in one of the key areas for biomed and the knowledge-intensive industries, because there won't be a local plan, and I'll have to start all over again on a call for sites for all that wet lab space and everything else. So there are unforeseen, or I think unintended consequences to some of this, which I really hope the government are going to listen to.
I'm just mindful, we've got still a few areas to cover, so just to members and our guests, just be quite shorter with your responses.
Chair, could I just clarify the number in the white paper? The white paper actually says a minimum of 500,000, but with sort of exceptional circumstances. So where appropriate, because of the geography or for whatever reason, the Minister has said that he may move from that number, but equally he has said in the past not 200,000 or 300,000 at that sort of level. So I think that is the sort of the starting point in terms of the white paper.
Right. Chris, fiscal devolution.
Thank you. It's a similar question to what we had earlier. Do you think there are any other fiscal powers that would be appropriate to devolve to local or combined authorities in the white paper? Do you want to kick us off, Louise?
Yeah, so we this is something that we've called for quite a long time. It's not going to help the immediate funding crisis that we have in local government. Tracy mentioned tourist levy, the pressure that tourists put on in a positive way on both the economy but also on service delivery. So some sort of tourist levy, I think, would be really helpful, and the ability to set taxes locally rather than nationally.
If I may just add to that, Chair, also land value capture is something that we're looking at quite closely, particularly when we're looking at a huge infrastructure project like mass transit. Business rate retention, where you could have thresholds that don't affect small SMEs, but also can take some benefit of the growth that you've created because of your investments and your innovations. How can we make sure that some of that money stays in our region? And finally, we've also having conversations, and it was raised at a growth roundtable with the Chancellor and the mayors, about having direct conversations with the Treasury rather than submitting to departments our applications for spending, but to speak directly to Treasury, I think is something that also that we're having conversations about. As I say, it is a whole new world, and at the moment it's slightly murky, but I think with collaboration and cooperation, I think we can definitely get a model that's really exciting and will deliver growth across the whole country.
And then Bridget.
Very quickly. So we need the arbitrary cap on council tax removed, because that will help some councils get out of debt. We need to have the freedoms to raise licensing fees and planning fees to cover our costs, and things like tourist tax. It's a drop in the ocean. We tried to introduce it, and it was voted down by those very organisations which were going to have to levy it on our behalf.
Okay.
And we need to be careful that local sort of taxes aren't to substitute for central sustainable funding for the sort of key services. But I think I think giving some flexibility locally for sort of innovative fiscal arrangements, I think absolutely makes sense, and particularly around those areas where we're getting rewarded, if you like, for driving that economic growth. So whether it's business rate retention or some form of tax, I think will then really incentivise areas to get on with it.
So there was one, just a very quick question to Louise, if that's all right. We had one issue with more fiscal devolution brought up in the previous panel, which was inequality between regions. I think the other one that we didn't speak about before is this idea of creating, favourable tax arrangements over here, which can move certain organisations in and lowering the overall tax base across the country. Do you have either of those two concerns? And if so, any thoughts on how we might mitigate against them?
What we've seen recently is the government shifting funding to areas that have a very low council tax base, where they've got a lot of Band A and Band B properties. So potentially there could be some issues. I mean, the whole council tax discussion, I think, is probably for a separate one, and that might be something that I think at one day it'd be great if we could all sit down and come up with a more progressive version of council tax.
How long do you have?
I did promise the chair it'd be a quick question.
Yeah, so I think
good question.
That, yes, so I think that there could be some inequalities there.
Just moving on to unitarisation, Lewis.
Yes, and I was mulling over in my head how to ask these types of questions, because I think we kind of got the answers around size and the appropriateness of that, and there's been different comments from different people. But I suppose, Tim, if we can start with you. So you talk about you think it should be 500,000 or more because of the certain services that the other authorities deliver, like adult social care, that the benefits won't be realised if it's smaller than that. What's your views on then giving the mayor of that combined authority the adult social services and the children's services, so you remove them completely from councils, and then you could get the fuller benefits, let's say, for example, on that wider footprint, then your worries about breaking those up?
It goes back to the division of responsibility. I don't think, and Tracy may have a different view, the mayor has a strategic role to drive growth and to be the coordinator across the mayoral footprint. It is not the mayor's role to deliver day-to-day services. And if you're going to give the mayor the responsibility for adult social care and adult social care and children's services, then you have to question what the sustainability is of the local councils. I think there is a huge difference between what councils now deliver on a day-to-day and engage with their communities, and really what that role should be going forward. But certainly my members of the County Council Superior Authorities would not support passing those responsibilities to the mayor.
Well, just to concur that we want strong local authorities that deliver those day-to-day services, whether that's libraries, snow clearances, refuse, adult social care, children's services. This is what they do brilliantly, and we're here in partnership to help them deliver and to be a voice for them, also to say to government they need sustainable long-term funding in order to prepare and to plan for the future to deliver these services, not have these cliff edges and often hanging by a thread and can't recruit and so on. So we are absolutely in partnership, but we have a different job to do as a Metro Mayor. It's a strategic view of the whole region. It's about growth, about innovation and opportunity.
And then, Louise, if I can ask you a different question. Your area has been through unitarisation, albeit some time ago. And obviously my concern with unitarisation, how do you get all of that economic growth and the place bit right, so that those powers that the districts currently have around economic growth, around town centres and what have you, the more town centres you put within a council area, that harder that becomes to learn all of those town centres, to know all of the nuances. So how does that work in your authority at the moment? And do you think you've got that quite right, or could you do better?
So it's a really interesting question, and that is a challenge because you want to make sure that it's done fairly across your patch. Actually, we've done really well in Cheshire West because with the economy, because we've got High Net is based in there and it's just had £6 billion from government. But balancing the different areas. And actually we had a really ambitious regeneration programme that came out of COVID in all of our main towns and our city as well. So we started programmes, and I think it's about working with your local councillors so that you can see where the areas of need, and inclusive growth is really important. There is a concern, not a concern, but sometimes I think smaller villages feel like maybe they're left behind. So it's about having lots of balls and juggling them all up. Pretty much the same that the mayor does, but at a hyper-local area. So it can be done.
And then, Bridget, if I can ask you a slightly different question, do you want to give us some views about planning around, obviously, if you have a bigger authority, some people might say it's easier for the government to force through lots more housing in different areas because their authority is bigger and you can put more housing together. Do you want to comment on any planning stuff around the process of going through unitarisation? You've made some comments already. If the government want to build 1.5 million homes, how's that going to happen through unitarisation?
So, I mean, right, let me just think. So I think, a knowledge of place and a closeness to place is absolutely key to good place making. And it's not just about building houses, because, if the government just wanted to build 1.5 million houses, they would be focusing on the area where land values are really, really low. And actually, a lot of the focus, I know from personal experience, is on, my area where the land values are as high as London, because, that is where the opportunity is for economic growth. There's no point in building houses which aren't associated with jobs. So it has to be responding to the job market, and particularly to the emerging economies, particularly in the knowledge intensive sectors. So if you're to get this right, you've got to be able to work with organisations and, smaller unitaries. So I'm slightly being painted as somebody who's fighting for the cause of district councils, which I'm not doing. What I'm doing is accepting we are where we are, but, fighting for the cause of smaller unitaries, which maintain that connection to local place, so that place making, when you're talking about thousands, if not tens of thousands of new houses, is acceptable to residents, responds to the needs of business. And, we've heard a lot about JRs recently and things getting tied up in JRs. So my local plan has, I think, about 60,000 houses in it. The current local plan, we are involved in these, very amicable conversation with government about, really, going way over and beyond that, because, we believe that there is going to be an increased need. Don't quite accept the 150,000, but, there is undoubtedly huge scope where we are. And if you end up with these, mammoth organisations, they will lose that ability. So if you just think about the combined authority I have, there are 3 distinct economies there. There's Greater Cambridge, which I'm part of. There's Fenland, which is largely agricultural, and then there's the sort of Huntingdon area, where which is a real mixture, much more you see in the rest of the country. You've got to have people who are specialists in their area's economy and consequently what the housing need is, so that you can be building the right sort of houses in the right places that will deliver, but also will work for our residents.
Just final question. I'm mindful we are full of. Did you want to come in?
No, it's fine. We can follow up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask a final question to you, Tracy, in terms of obviously the role. What do you think going forward should be the role of the mayoral council?
The mayoral council is a great development, and a few days after the election, the mayors were invited to number 10, and there was the commitment there that we would have regions and nations, obviously different to the mayor's council. And the mayor's council, it's chaired by the deputy prime minister, which indicates, as you can see, the commitment to the mayors, and it's a real opportunity. We've only had 2, so I'm basing my experience on 2 meetings, but we have an opportunity there to sort of roll up our sleeves and talk about the white paper. There's how we're going to submit to the spending review, and also talk to ministers specifically about, for example, work and well-being, and the expansion of responsibilities for mayors to look at health as well as work. And also to talk about employment and to be able to get into the weeds of some of the things that we want to achieve. But it's a really great opportunity to get all the mayors around the table. There are 12 currently, but there are many more coming on stream. So it's a great chance for us to share learning as well. So those mayors that are further along the journey, more experienced, can also support mayors who are newer, but also get access to the Deputy Prime Minister and to state their case about the things that are concerning them. But it is a great step in the right direction. And just to reiterate, the way that this government have approached it has been exemplary, and we feel, we're on a very exciting journey.
You wanted to come in?
Well, just simply to say that we're also very pleased that the Deputy Prime Minister has set up the Council of the Leaders, which is to help reset the relationship between central government and local government. And actually what would be really good is to work out how the Council of the Leaders can then engage with the mayoral councils as well.
Yeah, just to build on that, the Leaders Council has been really successful. It's given us an opportunity to do some really starting to do some in-depth discussions or get into the weeds of it, as Tracy likes to say, about some of the really challenging areas that we're facing. And I think that interaction between the Mayor's Council would be good to look to see how that's going to work.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for coming this morning, and I think opening up some really important discussions that we'll continue to pursue from the committee. Order.